Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. This program is about what I call the wisdom of the ages. It's an intriguing thing for me that I spent some time in Greece just recently with my friend Deepak Chopra and his wife, Rita, and my wife, Marceline. And we did a seminar for a couple of thousand people in Greece over a period of 3 or 4 days. And then we had the opportunity to tour the Parthenon and the Acropolis with a Greek historian, a history professor from who was retired from Greece. It's a beautiful man. We had a wonderful day. And while we were walking through the ruins and listening to all of the stories of all of the great teachers who we've learned so much from in Greece, from Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and Demosthenes and Pythagoras and people like this that we've all sort of taken for granted in our lives. I had a very wonderful sensation, and I shared it with Deepak while we were listening to one of the things that the history professor was telling us. He said something to the effect that over here on this particular place is where Socrates was forced to drink hemlock because of stating his views about man's freedom and so on. And I had this sense that all of us are really walking on the very same ground that these great teachers who've come before us have walked. And they're having their bodies warmed by the exact same sun that warms our bodies. And when they would look out at night, they would look out at the very same moon that we look out every night. And they were drinking literally the same water that we drank and breathing the exact same air that we breathe today. And there's a sense of a connection to all of these people. And while I was up there and talking and listening and having this almost a spiritual experience of feeling connected to these people, I realized that they felt very strongly about what they believed, so strongly, in fact, that they often sacrificed their lives in order to be able to say it, to put it down, and we take it for granted today, this great wisdom that they provided for us. So that our connection to these great masters, these ancient people, is really a connection of more than just words and more than what we read. It's a connection of spirit. And I told Deepak, I said, when I get back, and I said this to my wife as well, when I get back, I am going to write. I'm going to take 60 of these people, the great teachers of the last 25 or 30 centuries. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to take one of their contributions, whether it's a poem or a piece of their philosophy or a piece of one of their speeches or whatever, and I'd like to put it at the top, and then I would like to write what I believe that these people were saying to us. And it's an extraordinary experience to put yourself into a position where you challenge yourself, because I had 60 days free to do this writing, and I wanted to write 60 essays. And in addition to writing the 60 essays, I wanted to read everything that I could that they had contributed. And in addition to that, I wanted to read as much about them as I could, but I had to do it all in one day. So it was every day I would take on the challenge of immersing myself in this literature, all I could find out about them, and then I would take a picture or a portrait of these people. And these people ran a gamut from some of the people that I mentioned from the early Greeks to people in the East like Patanjali and Buddha and Jesus and Omar Khayyam and some of the great poets of the Renaissance and the great artists like Michelangelo and Da Vinci and John Keats and Percy Shelley and Yeats and some of the more contemporary people like Martin Luther King and Mother Teresa. And I took this whole collection of some 60 people, many of whom I'll talk about and speak about here in this program. And all of them were saying something to us. And one of the things I think that they were saying to us that really resonates with me is, don't die with your music still in you. And a lot of people do. In fact, it's my experience in working with people over the past quarter of a century or so that too many of us, and those especially who experience a level of frustration and disappointment in their lives. I remember the wonderful novel, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And there was Ivan laying on his deathbed, and he was contemplating this question that would be a horrible question to have to contemplate. He said, what if my life has been wrong? What if my life has been wrong? What if I didn't really do what I came here to do? Because part of me really knows, more than just believes, but knows that when you're born and when you show up here, your work shows up here with you. It's placed in your heart. And too often we ignore it in the name of fulfilling a destiny that has been laid out for us by other people and so on. So these people that I will be referring to, what I call ancient wisdom, this ancient wisdom came from people who felt something very profound in their hearts that they absolutely knew that they had to express. And it's almost as if you have to find within yourself what it is that you know you are here for and follow that instinct independent of what anybody else out there might think about it, without being objectionable and nasty and recalcitrant and so on, but still having within you this knowing that I have certain music that I have to play. I have certain things that I have to do. And I feel it deeply, and I feel connected to that. And not allowing myself to do it means that I might spend that time. I might get to that place at the end of my life and say, what if it's been wrong? What if I didn't listen to that inner voice? The words of some of the greatest poets and philosophers, writers, and spiritual leaders of civilization can teach us much about how to improve our daily lives. The great teachers all had something very profound that we had to memorize to get through English 101 or a psychology course or a philosophy course or a humanities course, but something that could get us through a life course, something that could get us through each and every one of our days in how to deal more effectively with each other and how to create prosperity for myself and my life and how to go through my life with a sense of peace and joy and bliss despite what was going on around me. Despite whatever was happening outside of me, I have that within me. The wisdom of the ages can teach us how to make our lives work at a higher and more profound and more peaceful and more loving way each and every day, and we need to pay much more attention to it. There's two things about these people that I think are significant. One is what they were like, and the second is what they had to say. And one of them is an ancient teacher. His name is Patanjali. And Patanjali is known in the ancient world 1 to 3 centuries before the birth of Christ. There's no actual date of actual record of his birth and death. And he was the one who wrote the original Yoga Sutras and wrote a wonderful book that I immersed myself in a few years back called How to Know God. And Patanjali, one of the things that he said to these people, now remember, we're talking about something that's going back maybe 3,500 years or more. And here was this great teacher in the ancient world. And this is one of the things that he said. When you are inspired, the word inspired comes from in spirit. I don't know if you've ever noticed that when you're truly inspired in your life, that is, when you're doing what you know you're here for, everything seems to work. The right people show up. You don't worry about being hungry. You don't worry about being tired. You're not concerned with whether or not anybody's going to like it or not. When you're truly inspired, that is, whether it's cooking or being with your children or writing or composing music or filling out tax forms, whatever it might be, when you feel inspired, everything works. And the reason that everything works is because you have left the material, the physical world, the world of the ego, and you've moved into the world of spirit. And when you move into the world of spirit, into that invisible world, you get connected. And inspiration means inspired. And Patanjali said, when you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction. And you find yourself in a new and great and wonderful world. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents come alive. And you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. There's some very important wisdom in that. This idea of finding yourself inspired means that you allow these dormant forces, these things that are in every single one of us, to come alive. Consciousness begins to expand. Things begin to show up in your life. You begin to manage the coincidences of your life. Things that you thought, and everybody has these kinds of experiences where your attention is on something, where you're thinking about something. I don't know, maybe it's your sister who lives in another city, in another part of the world. And you can't get your mind off of her, and you haven't talked to her for 5 years. And the telephone rings, and it's your sister. And when those things happen, you go, booga, booga, booga. What's going on here? And you call everybody that you know. And you say, you're not going to believe what happened. Everybody's got a story like that. And it happens to them on a regular basis. I was just thinking about that. And you showed up. Somebody told me that here this evening. I didn't even know that I was going to be coming to this. And a friend of mine, I just ran into him, and he said, he's speaking here, and would you like to come to this television show? And he said, I just can't believe that it happened. I said, but when you start, what happens is when you start to get inspired in your life, you start to reach new levels, and things begin to... But if you believe that it can't, or if you think it's just a coincidence, which is an interesting word, because in mathematics, coincidence talks about angles that coincide. They coincide. It's perfect. There's a perfection in coincide, coincidence. But we think that it just means that it was just some lucky thing that just sort of happened to me. And it was just something that is in the world of chance. And I'd like to suggest that managing those coincidences and getting yourself inspired is one of the great lessons we can learn from these ancient teachers. There's something that is called the perennial philosophy. It was a book written by Aldous Huxley. And I've read it many times and read through it and quoted from it, and it's a big part of my life. And what he did is he looked at the wisdom of ancient people. And he looked at the wisdom of contemporary people. He looked at Eastern and Western religions. He looked at philosophy from the Native Americans and people who lived in tribes and the Stoic philosophers and so on. He studied all of these different people, and he said there's a perennial philosophy. And this perennial philosophy is something that human beings have believed in since we have such something called recorded history. They've all believed in that. And there's two things that all societies and all peoples have embraced, no matter what time they appeared here on this planet. He said the first is that they know that there is a world beyond the world of the changing. Beyond the world of the changing. So that the world of the changing, when Lao Tzu, the great ancient founder of the Tao, back in the 5th century BC, the founder of Taoism, a beautiful sort of philosophy which is all summarized in about 83 pages. It's great. You can read it in an afternoon. And Lao Tzu was asked the question, what is real? Master, what is real? And his response was, that is real, which never changes. So almost as if you have to look at your own life and your own self, and you have to ask the question, what part of me meets that criteria? What part of me says, I am eternal? I have always been. What part of you has never changed? I don't know about you, but it's not my body. I promise you that. My body has undergone dramatic changes, but there's inside of this body, there is a witness. And this witness is noticing and observing and has never aged or never changed. Lao Tzu said the second thing that historically everyone has believed in is that we are connected to that world that is never changing. That it is a part of us. We live with it. It's within us. So that these two qualities, when I look at one of the great letters I ever received in my life, I want to share this with you. It's written by, because I've never met this guy, and maybe, just maybe, he's going to watch this show someplace. He wrote it to me on the 11th of September, 1986. It's actually written to by a teacher in Arkansas, in Crossett, Arkansas. Her name is Gail Thomas. The letter goes like this. She says, Dear Dr. Dyer, as a class assignment, I asked my gifted, talented students to write about something in our gifted class. My idea was that they would write about some of the material we had covered during the first week. She said, I do give the children a certain leeway with my direction, but I was completely taken by surprise when Ronnie Terrell, a fidgety boy in my last period class, wrote this jewel. I had your book, The Sky's the Limit, propped up on my chalk tray, and apparently this is what caught Ronnie's eye. She said, I've seen you many times on The Tonight Show, and I felt that with your sense of humor, you would love this. This is Ronnie Terrell's impressions of the class after looking at my picture for 1 week. He says, Dr. Wayne Dyer is slick-headed. His barber was probably drunk, or he was caught by an Indian. And then he has this wonderful line that only a little twerpy kid like I was at one time, sitting in the back row, could write. He says, I wonder if flies slide off of his head. He said maybe he was once a magician and he did a disappearing act and he came back, but his hair forgot to. Poor man, he says, his wife used to give him head and shoulders, and now she comes home with mop and glow. And he goes on and on. Ronnie Terrell, all right? But he speaks to something that is very relevant, and that is this whole idea that everything that we see in the physical world is changing. I was giving a talk not too long ago in Baltimore, and I was sitting just jotting down a few things that I wanted to talk about that evening, and there was a mirrored wall right next to me. The whole wall was mirrored. And I was feeling really great. I had just run about 10 miles, and I was just feeling really up and terrific, and I had a nice big audience coming that night, and everything was just really great. And I looked up over at the wall, and then I looked down again, and then I looked again real fast. Have you ever done that, where you look in the mirror and you say, who is that in there? And I looked down, and I looked in again. And then I stopped, and I put my pen down, and I started staring at this face that was looking back at me. And I said, there's an old man in there renting my face. That's not me. You see, the part of me that is in here, that has been watching this, that has been observing this, that has been noticing this, has never aged and never does. It never can. I remember one time I was out running when we were on the road, and my wife was with me, and I'd been running for a couple of hours and early in the morning, and it was a real beautiful, crisp morning. And she waved at me, and she said, come on, we're going to have breakfast or something. And I stopped running, and I ran across this field, and there was a fence. The fence was about this high. And I ran up to the fence, and I hurled over the fence. I just jumped over the fence. And she looked at me, she said, you can't do that. I said, do what? She said, you're 56 years old. You don't jump over fences when you're 56 years old. You could kill yourself. I said, I forgot. And the part of me that's in here, that's noticing, that's watching, and the part of you that's in you, watching, things are falling. You've noticed that, right? Things are wrinkling. Things are turning gray. There's a process of shifting and changing. But there's a world beyond that. And all of these great teachers speak to that world, the world that is beyond the world of the changing. And it's almost as if we have to begin to know that world. There's a famous poem by Emily Dickinson, who's one of the people I wrote about in Wisdom of the Ages. Emily Dickinson, who 19th century poet, lived up in Massachusetts. Brilliant lady, wrote thousands of poems. A lot of them were about higher awareness and higher consciousness. In a very simple language, she said, imagine holding up a handful of dust or dirt. She said, this quiet dust was gentlemen and ladies and lads and girls, was laughter and ability and sighing and frocks and curls. This passive place, a summer's nimble mansion where bloom and bees fulfilled their oriental circuit, then ceased like these. This quiet dust was gentlemen and ladies and lads and girls, was laughter and ability and sighing and frocks and curls. It's all quiet dust, all of it. And it's all in a state of change. And who we are is not that dust. And that's what the poets and the philosophers and the great teachers have come to tell us about and risk their lives to tell us, that there's something more to it. You all, when you go to the physician and you get a blood test, and they'll come back and they'll tell you about your iron count. There's a finite supply of iron on the planet. Just so much iron. Some of it's flowing through your veins. The question, the eternal question, is where was that iron that's flowing through your vein before you showed up here? And where will it be when you leave? Because who you are is not that which is that material, but who you are is that quiet observer in there. And this is called, for want of a better term, it's called the world of the soul. There was a line from Herman Melville, who wrote, a great American writer, and I used this in the book. It's called From Moby Dick. He says, listen to how a great writer puts it. For as this appalling ocean surrounds the verdant land, so in the soul of man there lies one insular Tahiti, full of peace and joy, but encompassed by all of the horrors of the half-lived life. An insular Tahiti, a part of each and every one of us that is verdant and flush and full of music and full of love and joy and bliss, surrounded by this appalling ocean. Robert Frost talked about it this way. He said, we all sit around in a ring and suppose, while the secret sits in the center and knows. There's a secret in the center. One of the old Zen proverbs says that it's the silence between the notes that makes the music. It's not the note. It's that space between. And that space or silence that's in each and every one of us is also what we have to make contact with, that world of the soul, that world of the spirit. And when we begin to live from there, we're listening to what so many of these great teachers had to say to us, whether they said it to us poetically or whether they said it to us in their speeches. One of the things about these people is that they had a quality of almost as if saying, if I don't say what I have to say, or do what I have to do, or put it out there, or paint it like Michelangelo on his back for 4 years painting, or Da Vinci, or whomever, if I don't do it, I'll die. You almost have to find what that is within yourself and live from that. Much of what we think of when we think of ancient wisdom, or the wisdom of the ages, is something called enlightenment. We all want to be enlightened. Everybody wants to reach this exalted level of feeling blissful in their lives. And there's a wonderful Zen proverb that I used in this writing that I'd like to share with you. It's very simple. It says, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Period. Now, what this means to me is that enlightenment doesn't mean that our problems are going to go away. It doesn't mean that we're going to have to stop chopping wood and carrying water. We're going to have to stop working and we can just sit around and contemplate our navels for the rest of our lives. It has to do with how you approach what it is that you do, what your belief about it is, what your inner world, what that insular Tahiti tells you about what it is that you're doing. I'm going to tell you a story. It's just an astonishing thing. It happened just a couple of weeks ago. It was a holiday, so everything was closed down. And I decided that I was going to wash my car. So I took my car out, and I put it right in front of the house, right in front of the front door. And there's just a little alcove where there's a whole bunch of flowers that my wife has planted in there, and that's where we keep this hose. So the hose was all coiled up in there and everything. And I got the rags and the towels and the soaps and all of the things that I used to wash the car out. And I went back in there and I turned the water on, but the hose wasn't coming out far enough to reach the car. So I just gave it a gentle tug. I swear it was a gentle tug. And I just went like this, like that. And all of a sudden, I hear this scream over the intercom, which is right next to where I had just pulled this up. And it's my wife in the shower saying something to the effect, whatever you just did, all the water in the house has stopped. I'm in the shower. I've got soap all over my hair. Get it fixed. I look over, and it's Old Faithful. I mean, there is water pouring out of the ground, just right out of the ground. I mean, a ton of it, like a spout of water. And I immediately, because I'm not known as the Mr. Handyman, my kids over here are laughing at me, but my Indian name is I write the checks, all right? And I usually just find somebody to fix these kind of things. That's just not what I do. I'm a poet and a prophet. So I immediately went over and I tried to put my foot on this hole, and my foot just went flying off like this because the water was coming out of there. I mean, thousands of gallons. And there's a little water meter right in front of the house. And I went over and I looked at the water meter, and it was going like this. And I could just see the water bill when it was going to be coming in. So I went back and I knocked on the door, and my wife's she's back there. She's saying, "What in the world did you do? What happened?" Well, I reached in where that was happening, and I happened to just bring this over with me tonight. And I brought, this is it. This is a true story. I grabbed this, and it came right out of the ground. And the water was, that was the Old Faithful blowing up there. And I'm standing there, and my wife opens the door with soap all over her hair, standing there. She said, what did I say, honey? I don't know what happened. I was just standing there, and she goes, well, Hercules. She said, in my next life, I'm going to marry a real man, which really got to me. Eh? Instead of a poet, I'm going to marry a real man who can fix things. So, but all the time, what was that? All the time this thing was happening, there was a part of me that was watching this. Truly. And my wife said the very same thing. That I said, I'm going to laugh at this. There's going to come a time when I'm going to laugh at this. Because then we got on the telephone, and we called the water company, and it was a holiday, so nobody's going to come out. So he's giving instructions to my wife, who's standing there with the soap all over and no clothes on how to turn the water off to the house. And it's like in front of the water meter, and I had to reach down in, and there were 10 billion ants in there, in this place, and I tried to get it with a pair of pliers, and he told me you have to have a special tool. Of course, I have no tools at all. And I finally got this thing, turned off, and the plumber came out on a holiday, and, I asked the plumber, I couldn't believe the bill he handed me. I said, my God, my physician doesn't charge me that much. He said, when I was a physician, I didn't charge that much either. I said, I'm a plumber now. That's why I changed. So, but all the time, this whole story and all this entire thing was happening, I had a sense that of watching it, of observing it, of noticing it, of becoming the witness. And I think learning, one of the things I learned from listening to so many of these great teachers and these great people is how to become the witness to your life. How to, not so much identify with the stuff that is going on. You're always going to chop wood. There's always going to be problems. We're never going to end marital strife. There's always going to be things that we're going to disagree on. We're not going to end financial difficulties, struggles that we go through. Those kinds of things are just a part of the human condition. We work, we carry water, we chop wood, we do these kinds of things. But it's not like you're going to find enlightenment. There's a Talopa, who was a 10th century Sufi, who said that enlightenment means to have a mind that is open to everything, but attached to nothing. Open to everything, but not attached, detached from all of the outcome, from all of the stuff that's going on out there. And if you can learn how to cultivate just that one simple thing, to start to watch, to start to notice, to start to become the observer in your life. And even though you can't separate them, there is a oneness to all of it, of course. But when you start to stand back, and I was saying, you really are doing something pretty silly right here, and you're getting it, and it's like, poor Wayne, what a slob he is. I mean, he can't even fix a simple. I mean, I realize this, but I'm able to watch it and laugh about it. And as you're able to do this, you start to cultivate more of an attitude of, there's more to me than the pettiness that is going to be the problems that I'm going to encounter. And in our culture, in our world, we see an enormous amount of rage. We see people who are so identified with all of the stuff out there that has happened. And so many people don't know how to go here and get quiet, get peaceful. One of the people that I wrote about in this book was Blaise Pascal. Blaise Pascal was a great philosopher, but he was also a scientist. You had to remember Pascal's law, and you had to read about pressure and learn about all of that stuff in your physics class or in your chemistry classes or whatever. But he was also a great thinker. And he said, all of man's troubles stem from his inability to sit quietly in a room alone. We don't know how to get quiet. We don't know how to get peaceful. We don't know how to go within and summon that force within us, our connection to our source. Because so many of us are separated from our source through the ego, through this identification with all of the stuff that's out there happening. And so many of these teachers spoke about this quality of the soul, this quality of spirit, this quality of being more than just what you notice, more than what you observe. So, to me, there's something called mastery, living at the highest level. Many of these people that I admire so deeply, that I wrote about and I speak about here today, had qualities in their life that reflect something called mastery. And this thing called mastery has in it what I think of as 4 pathways. I was speaking in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a couple of years ago, and a man who brought me there to give a talk for the United Way there, to raise funds there, handed me a book at dinner. And he said, read this book. It's a book that I think you'll get a lot out of. It's a golf book. I said, golf? I don't golf. I don't know anything about golf. I'm not interested in it. He said, no, it's not about golf. It's something I think you'll really value. It's called The Legend of Bagger Vance. And so I took it home and I started reading it, and I got really intrigued with it. And it takes place in 1931. It's a novel. It takes place back in 1931, and it's a fictional kind of story of Bobby Jones and Walter Hagen and another golfer, the two of the greatest golfers who ever lived, who were having this golf tournament someplace in the South. And Bagger Vance is this caddy, and Bobby Jones is asking the question, how do I master the perfect swing? And he couldn't figure out a way to get he wanted to just once in his life have the perfect swing that he knew that he was in harmony with. And he has it explained to him like this. He says there's really 4 pathways. I call them pathways, but there's 4 things that you have to go to to reach this level of mastery. And this isn't about the perfect swing, folks. This is about virtually everything in your life. The first pathway is called discipline. Discipline. So this is when you use the body, when you train the body to do what you want it to do. If you want to get good at something, you have to practice. It doesn't matter what it is that you do. Everybody who's really a master, who's really good at things, goes to practice. Whether it's playing basketball or playing, bridge or anything that you do, you practice. The second pathway is called the pathway of wisdom. And this is when you begin to apply what you have disciplined yourself to, you begin to apply the thoughts to the discipline. So that if you're going to go out, say, to learn how to play tennis, which is something that I do, you want to learn how to hit a backhand. You first go out and you just learn how to hit a backhand, and you hit thousands of backhands. Then you begin to realize in order to play tennis, there are a lot of things that I have to apply. So you begin to practice. And you practice the swing, and you practice how you hold your racket, and you practice overheads, and you practice drop shots, and you practice serving, and you learn all of the rules of the game and how to get your opponent out of position, and so on. You apply the intellect. And this is what we mean by education. When we send our children to school, what we are really saying to them is, get some discipline and use your head. And use your head. And so we want them to be disciplined. We want them to use their head, get their grades, and get through. And this is basically what we mean by education. By formal education, it is someone who is disciplined and has used their head. But it has very little to do with mastery. Mastery is that highest level. It's that place that you get to and you absolutely have a knowing that you are at one with your own purpose in life. So the third pathway is a pathway that's called unconditional love. And he was talking to this golfer about unconditional love, that if you're not doing what you love and loving what you do, then you'll never reach mastery in your life. And I'd like to say to everybody watching this program, and I know it sounds simple, and you might even be saying, yeah, well, that's easy for you to say, but you don't know about the conditions of my life, and you don't know about my mortgages, and you don't know about all of the things that have gone on in my life. And I'd like to suggest to you that you remember that when you put your attention on what you don't want or what you can't do, then what you can't do is what you will continue to manifest and materialize into your life. You have to learn how to shift your attention off of what you don't want and can't do onto what you do want and can do. And that means changing your thought pattern. And I'd like to say to everyone watching, if you're not doing what you love and loving what you do, you have 2 choices to make. One is to change what you're doing, or 2 is to change how you feel about what you're doing. And that's something that you can do in an instant. It's how I feel about my writing. It's how I feel about speaking here and performing and putting out a program such as this. It's almost like you have to blur the line between your work and your play. I never know when I'm working and when I'm playing. I have people say to me, even today, and I'm 58 years old, I hear people saying to me, when are you going to get a job? Because I don't really know when I'm working and when I'm playing. It's all been blurred. There is this wonderful love. There is a story of unconditional love, a very profound story. It's a story that I read in a newspaper on Christmas morning, 1995. And it was a story of a woman who was taking care of her daughter and had been taking care of her at that time for a quarter of a century, 25 years. And her daughter's name is Eduarda, and she had slipped into a diabetic coma back on the 3rd of January, 1970. And this woman took her daughter to the hospital in southern Florida, and Eduarda was slipping into this coma, into this diabetic coma. She had been taking an oral form of insulin, and it wasn't, and she had some flu-like symptoms, and she began to slip away. And she said to her mother, who was holding her hand at the time, "You won't leave me, will you, Mommy?" And her mother said, "I would never leave you. I promise." And a promise is a promise. Now, she was a school teacher, and her husband was a football coach and teacher. And so they had limited income and very little insurance. And they were told by all of the government health people that if they didn't take their daughter and put her into a home, that they wouldn't be able to receive medical care because bringing her home meant that she wasn't sick. Somehow, that's the logic. But she had made a promise. Now, you have to imagine what it's like for a quarter of a century to feed your daughter every 2 hours, 12 times a day, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 6 a.m., to buy with money that you don't have, so borrowing and raising money in any way that you can, all the medication, and to learn how to give it every 4 hours, 6 times a day, and to have someone who was not on life support, who was being fed through a tube, but who was very much alive, whose stages of her coma were moving more towards possibly awakening someday, but all of the medical community said no. But that didn't make any difference because unconditional love was at work. And I read that story about this woman and doing this for a quarter of a century, and I said to my wife, "Read this." And I read it to my children. I said, "This is an astonishing story." And I finished it, and I signed a book that I had written a few years back called Real Magic, which was a book about miracles. And I also sent a check, and I felt that I had done something for these people. And then I went away to write one of my books, Manifest Your Destiny. And while I was writing, I turned on the television for the only time that I turned it on while I was over there, and a show came on announcing that there was a woman whose daughter's been in a coma for 25 plus years, and they showed her on television. I said, well, that could only be the woman I had just read about. And they showed the story. The opening scene was the mother reading to her daughter from the book that I had sent her a couple of weeks ago. And it said, "This is a book about miracles." And I thought, there's something at work here. There's something going on that connects me to that. And I said, when I get back home, I'm going to make contact. And I got back home, and the first letter on the table with all of my mail was a letter from this woman. And she invited us to come down and to meet her and Eduarda and her other daughter, Colleen. And I began to learn more about the story. And I felt deeply moved when we walked into that room. It was like all of this unconditional love that had been shown over a quarter of a century. And there was something about it. They said that when Jesus would go into a village, when Buddha would go into a village, they said just his presence in the village and nothing more would raise the consciousness of those around them. To be in the presence of a higher level of energy. And I suspect many of the people that I'm talking about here in this program lived at these higher levels. And when we walked into the room, both of us, my wife and I, were deeply, deeply touched, almost to the same point that we were when we went to Assisi, where St. Francis performed all of his miracles. And when we walked in there, both of us burst into tears. And it really transformed us, our relationship, and our lives. Just to be in that place where so much prayer, so much love had been given. And I decided, what can I do? And I went into a meditation, and, well, the bottom line is that my wife and I put together a book. It's called A Promise is a Promise. And it's the story, and it's the story of Eduarda and Kay, and how powerful the lesson that they have to teach us about unconditional love is. And all of the proceeds and all of the profits go directly to them. And as a special treat, what I've asked that lady to come down here tonight, and she has her daughter taking care of Eduarda. And she's here in the audience, and I'd like the world to meet and acknowledge this beautiful woman, Kay O'Bara. Kay, stand up. Indeed, a promise is a promise. And unconditional love is what I call what Bagger Vance was saying was the third pathway to wisdom. You've got to do what you love and love what you do. Because ego is the world of the material and the world of what is mine. Spirit is the world of unconditional love. Pierre Teilhard of Chardin, one of the people I wrote about and speak about, said that the glue that holds it all together is love. Unconditional love. It's at the source of every single cell of our beings. And when we are living from that, we move ourselves into a higher place wherein we can begin to become manifestors, become those who can literally create what it is that we feel is missing in our lives. And the fourth pathway, the beautiful fourth pathway, that I have finally come to know and understand in my own life is called surrender. Surrender. You have to surrender the little mind to the big mind. You have to, as they say in the recovery movement, anybody who's ever recovered from addictions, and today I am a camel, and a camel is an animal who starts every day out on his knees, and he ends every day on his knees. And he can go 24 hours without a drink. And there was a time when I didn't. And the way that I got past that in my life was not through any great discipline or even any great wisdom or even any great unconditional love. It was through surrender. Letting go and what? Letting God. And whatever God means to you. And this business of being able to surrender, I can tell you that when I sat down to write out these 60 essays and to talk about them, I would look into the face. I took a picture of the person or a portrait of the person. And I would look into their face and I would ask them the question, what is it that you would like me to say to you? And what is it you would like me to say to all of the people who are going to read your work? And then I would get quiet. And I would meditate and get very peaceful. I call it meditating for manifesting, just letting go. And I was writing on a yellow pad, and it's what I call automatic writing. Some of you have had the experience, whether it's with writing or with speaking or with composing or with singing or whatever, when you let go and allow it to flow through you, you begin to realize that you're not making the swing. And this is what Bagger Vance was telling Bobby Jones. It isn't you that's swinging the golf club. You've got to get your ego out of it. And you've got to have an overriding spiritual understanding that you allow this energy to flow through you. And you just go with that. And it's a very peaceful, dynamic, blissful, joyful way of being, to surrender, to let go, to allow yourself the peace, and to know what it means when it says in the spiritual literature, you are in this world, but you're not of this world. You're not of this world. And you have to let that which is not of this world, that which is eternal, start to guide your life. Whether it's your golf swing, or it's your relationship, you almost have to leave your marriage and enter into a spiritual partnership where your purpose in being with each other is not to get the other person to be the way I want you to be, but to assist them on their own spiritual journey, their own joy of being able to surrender. Surrender. It's a very powerful tool. I'd like to speak a bit about the qualities of what we call self-actualizing people. I've referred to these poets and philosophers and teachers and artists and so on as great teachers. And what they had to say is what we always studied. But what they were like is what intrigues me the most. What were these people like? People were crucified, executed, vilified. Emerson was considered to be someone who was extremely dangerous, as was Thoreau. People who were saying, let them march to their own drummer. Self-reliance. I think probably the most profound characteristic of all of the ancient teachers is that they were independent of the good opinion of other people. That's the first and most profound thing I can say to you. You've got to learn how in your life to become a person who is independent of the good opinion of others. When I was a little boy, I came home from school one day, and I asked the lady that we were living with at that time for just a short time, her name was Mrs. Scarf. I said, "What's a scurvy elephant?" She said, "A what?" I said, "A scurvy elephant." She said, "Where did you hear such a term?" I said, "I heard my third grade teacher, her name was Mrs. Poole, and she was talking to the principal, and she said Wayne Dyer was in her classroom, and he was a scurvy elephant." She said, "I've never heard of such a thing." She got on the telephone, and she called the principal, and the principal said, "Oh, that's Wayne. He gets everything mixed up." She didn't say that he was a scurvy elephant in her classroom. She said that he was a disturbing element in her classroom. I think we have to learn to honor the place within us that is disturbing perhaps to others. I think society honors its conformists when they're living and they're dead troublemakers. Because most of the people that I wrote about, that we revere, that we build shrines to, that we study courses on, all of these people were scurvy elephants. They were independent of the good opinion of others. And it has everything to do with being able to manifest. Because in order to be able to manifest the life that you want, you've got to have such passion about it that when other people out there, no matter whom they are, no matter how much you love them, no matter how kindly they have been to you, and you can honor that, and we need to honor that. All of the great things that our parents and their parents and our tribal ancestors have taught us about being more loving and kind and so on to each other is all wonderful information. And we need to be grateful for it. But within us, there's also this spark that says, this is what I have to say, and this is how I have to say it, and this is how I have to live. And if you can't honor that within yourself, you'll never be able to manifest, because manifesting doesn't take place from the material world. It takes place from spirit, from the invisible world. That which is seen, said St. Paul, hath not come from that which doth appear. The source of everything over here is over here, in the invisible spiritual world. And to be able to go there, you have to be in such a strong position within yourself of not needing the approval or being concerned about whether other people like it or don't like it. I think perhaps one of the most significant lessons that I've ever had to learn in my life is to become independent of the good opinion of other people. That is, to not allow what it is that I'm doing or how I'm running my life to be focused upon whether or not someone else is going to approve of it, whether they're going to like it, whether they're going to give me the proper grades, or whether I'm going to get a merit badge because of doing that. Once we learn how to become independent of the good opinion of others, not caring about what others think, but to be independent of that, This is perhaps the highest quality that we can have, because then we can rely upon our own intuition, our own thoughts, our own inner world, and that's literally our connection to manifesting in life. Whether you like to hear this message or don't, know that those people who we revere so much, I mean, Thoreau went to prison because he refused to pay his taxes to a government that was performing a Holocaust on this very land in North America, removing the Native Americans from the Indian Removal Act signed by President Jackson. And he said people who pay their taxes to a government that will do these things are just as guilty as those who are doing this. And he went to prison and then ultimately went to Walden Pond and lived at Walden deliberately, because something in him said, and I've heard the story, I don't know if it's true, if it's apocryphal or not, but Ralph Waldo Emerson came to the prison and said to Henry David Thoreau, who was his neighbor, and he was Thoreau's teacher, he said, "Henry, what are you doing in there?" And Thoreau apparently said to Emerson, "Ralph, what are you doing out there? I have to be here," because there was a part of him that just knew, and he went to Walden, and he lived and wrote, "Simplify, simplify, simplify," to which Emerson responded, "I think one simplify would have sufficed." So becoming independent of the good opinion of others. I think the second quality about these people is that they are detached from outcome. That means that they're living their life on purpose. This is a very important and significant quality that separates out great teachers, great philosophers, great thinkers, poets, prophets, the people that, again, that we respect and admire, is that they are not doing what they're doing because of what is going to come to them. They're doing what they're doing because this inner voice says, "I can't not do it. I'll die if I don't. I've got to get my music out. I can't die with my music in me." And so people who are detached from outcome, the irony of being detached from outcome, I think, is summed up in Thoreau's definition of success. I think the best definition of success I've ever heard came right from his mouth. He said, if you advance confidently in the direction of your own dreams and endeavor to live the life which you have imagined, you will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. That is, if you find what you know you have to do, what your intuition, what your inner voice tells you is why you're here, and you pursue that and let go of outcome, be unconcerned with how it's going to work out, you're going to find more and more things arriving and showing up in your life. I mean, it's been absolutely true for me. When I detach from outcome, I do my best writing. When I detach from being concerned about how an audience is going to react to me, I feel like I give my best talks. And when I stop being concerned, I mean, I had to learn this a long time ago. I didn't know this back even 20 years ago. I can remember calling my agent and friends and saying, "Where am I on the bestseller list?" Back when Erroneous Zones and Pulling Your Own Strings and Sky's the Limit, those books were topping the bestseller list. And then one day, I don't know if it was my wife, probably was, said to me, "You're not on the bestseller list. Your book is on the bestseller list. You are not the bestseller list." Big lesson, huge lesson. Detach from whether people are going to buy it, whether people are going to like it, and know in your heart, and then let go and just watch. And then it starts to show up. I remember when I so desperately wanted to do any national television back in the 70s. Desperately. You know, any show that I could get on, Phil Donahue or the Today Show, Good Morning America, The Tonight Show, and all of that. And none of that was coming. But I was out there, and I had purchased the first couple of printings of my book, and I went out there and I distributed them to various bookstores. I mean, I did crazy things. I filled my car with books, because every time somebody told me I couldn't do it as a scurvy elephant, I would just say, oh yeah, kind of thing, and thank them for telling me what I couldn't do, and then go out and do it. And then one day, I kind of let go of that, and I wasn't concerned any longer about trying to get on this show. I had a publicist who was doing that. Then I got a phone call from one of the talent coordinators on The Tonight Show, and he called up and he said, would you like to come on and do a pre-interview? Fly out to California. I said, great. I flew out to California, I did a pre-interview, and then I flew back to where I was staying in Michigan. Then I got a phone call in Michigan saying, you can do the show next Monday night. It was in August. It was 1976. And Shecky Greene was the host. And I said, great, I'll go on with Shecky Greene. I love Shecky Greene. I flew back out there. I did the show. It was fantastic. I got 20 minutes, the author spot, but we had 2 segments, and it was great. But it was August something, 1976, and it was the day of the Republican National Convention. And Robert Dole was giving the keynote address. And the first time in the history of The Tonight Show, they preempted The Tonight Show. After I had flown back to tell everybody about watch me on The Tonight Show, they had preempted it, and because his speech went too long. I have never been a real big fan of Bob Dole. No, that's just kidding, of course. So I was didn't know what was going to happen and so on. Apparently the next day at the meeting, this friend of mine who was working on the show, his name was Howard Papish, he went in and told them about this guest that had been on Monday night, and Johnny Carson had talked to them and said, look, if he was a good guest, then why don't we invite him to come back out and appear with me before that show airs. They called me back, flew me back out to Michigan, from Michigan. This time there was a limo waiting for me. All right? When I got to The Tonight Show, I did the show on Wednesday night. It was great. We had about 7 or 8 minutes, but we got cut short. And Johnny said to me, would you like to stay over and do the show again tomorrow night? Because we didn't really have enough time to give you. I said, no, I'm busy. I've got my screen door. I said, no. I said, of course. So I did the show the next night. Then on Monday, they showed the preempted show that had been preempted from the week before. So from having absolutely no national exposure of any kind, I had 3 Tonight Show appearances in 4 days. And it's about that business of advancing confidently in the direction of your own dreams, going out there, doing what your heart tells you to do. I can't tell you how many books I get from people have written this book, and please give me an endorsement, and please tell me how to go about doing it. They want these long letters, and I always respond, just do it. Just do it. You can't write my speech. You can't deliver my speech. You can't do it the way I did it. What does your heart tell you? Go out there and never stop. Have that passion and detach from the outcome. Such a powerful lesson. Let go of what's going to come to you, and what is going to come to you will keep showing up in larger and larger and larger amounts. There's a wonderful old fable of a cat and a kitten. And the kitten is chasing his tail. And he's chasing it and chasing it and chasing it and chasing it. You've seen little kittens do that. Finally, this old alley cat comes up to it and says, what are you doing? And the kitten said, well, I've just gone to cat philosophy school. And we learned 2 things in cat philosophy school. One is that the most important thing in the world for a cat is happiness. And 2, that it's located in my tail. That's what we learned. So what I'm doing is I'm chasing after it. And when I finally get my mouth on it and get a firm grip on it, I'll have a lock on eternal happiness. The old cat said, well, he said, I've never had the same opportunities that you have. I've lived in the alleys most of my life. I never got a chance to go to school. But it's interesting. I learned the same thing that you did. Number 1 is that the most important thing in the world for a cat is happiness, and indeed that it's located in my tail. He said the only difference between you and I is that I've found and discovered that when I go about my business and do the things that are most important to me, it follows after me wherever I go. And there's great wisdom in that fable. Let it chase you. Let it follow you instead of being something that you're consumed with having to get. Because the more you're attached to the outcome, the more you're trying to get something that isn't what you really want. Like if we're going to dance, if we're going to start and we're going to go to a dance, I can dance, Just like that pipe. The purpose of dancing at a dance floor is not to get to someplace else on the dance floor. Your purpose isn't to end up over here. Like, this is where we're going to end up. So all of this other stuff is irrelevant. Our purpose is to get here. We don't do that. When we dance, we enjoy every single step of the dance, all of the music. And wherever we end up is where we end up. It's just like enjoying a concert. I mean, the purpose of enjoying the concert isn't to get to the end. If that was the case, then the people who conducted the fastest would be the best. And people who wrote only finales would be considered geniuses. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, that was fantastic. You see? It's like peeling a banana. You know, the purpose isn't to get to the other end. It's to enjoy every bite. And the same with life. If we, self-actualizing, fully functioning, highly spiritual people, the great teachers are people who didn't do what they did because they were going to make money off of it, because they were going to be approved of, because it was going to be enduring. They did it because it was what their heart told them they had to do. I think the third characteristic of these people is that they have no investment in power or control over others. Their life is not about who I'm better than. See, true nobility is not about being better than somebody else. Everybody's better than somebody else at something and not as good as somebody else at something else. True nobility is about being better than you used to be. It's about growing in your life. That's what nobility is. And highly functioning people they're not looking into other people's lives. The last line of Candide, Voltaire's great novel, this whole story of this wanderer, Candide, this great teacher and sort of comic person. The last line, I guess we'll have to learn to cultivate our own garden. Cultivate your own garden. If other people want to grow rutabagas and you want to grow cabbage, then allow that and be independent of that. But so many people live their lives through what others are doing, how well they're doing it. Fully functioning people let go of that. I think a fourth characteristic is that they have incredibly high energy and enthusiasm. Enthusiasm, entheos, the God within. When people say to me, what makes a great speaker? I said, be authentic and be enthusiastic. And it doesn't matter what your content is. People will love you if you're authentic and enthusiastic, if they can see the God within you. And I think the final characteristic of these people is that they have no concept of failure. There's no such thing. If you take a golf ball and you put it up on a tee, and you stand there and you swing at the golf ball, and it dribbles off to the side, you haven't failed. You've produced a result. The question is, what do you do with the results you produce? Everything that you do produces a result. You can call it failure and say, well, I'm not good at this, I've never been very athletic, and apply all kinds of labels to yourself. But we should never, ever allow ourselves to think of ourselves as failures, nor should we ever place that label on anybody else, because you can't fail. It's just a judgment. The only difference between a flower and a weed is a judgment. It's just a judgment. And the difference between success and failure is just a judgment. You know, Edison, the great inventor, of course. You know, when asked the question, he had tried 25,000 different ways to invent a battery, and he still didn't have it. And finally, someone said to him, how does it feel, someone of your stature, to have failed 25,000 times? He said, failed? I don't know anything about failing. He said, today I know 25,000 ways not to make a battery. What do you know? And every time you do something, every time you go, and it doesn't work, you learn something. And the question isn't whether you failed, it's what do I do with the results I produce? If you pick the golf tee ball up and put it back on there and say, all right, I'm going to correct that, and you do it again and again and again, eventually, if you go through the four pathways, if you practice the discipline and the wisdom and the unconditional love, eventually, when you surrender, you'll know how to hit a golf ball. But you'll never do it the moment you label yourself to be a failure. So those are some of the characteristics. There are others. Characteristics such as being inner-directed and welcoming the unknown, and so on. One of the great lessons I had to learn in my life was as a school teacher. And it also overlaps into being a parent. There was a Swiss psychiatrist whose name was Jean Piaget. And Piaget would teach a group of students, and this was the great lesson from Piaget. He would teach a group of students, he would present them with a lecture method, all of these, let's say they were teaching Spanish or chemistry or whatever. And they would present the lecture method, which is the way most of us discipline our children and talk to our children, through lecture. And then he would find at the end of the marking period, there would be what they call a normal bell-shaped curve of distribution. 68% approximately in the middle, C students, C plus, C minus. Another 14% or 13.6% as Bs and 13.6% as Ds, and then another 3 or 4% as As. So you would have a distribution. There would be As, Bs, Cs, Ds, and those who didn't get anything, all right? And it would spell. Then he would take the same group of students, and instead of using a lecture method, they would use a visual method. They would just show pictures, and they would do it through drawings and so on. And then they found out at the end of the marking period that there was the same distribution, except that there were different people in the genius range, and different people in the didn't get anything out of it range, and a whole new group of Bs and a whole new group of Ds. Then they would take another method, and they would instruct them on, say, just using sounds, or just doing drawing, or any other method that they maybe just hands-on involvement or whatever. And they would have another distribution that would always be the same, but you'd have new people in the various categories. So that there's a genius in every single one of you. Everybody watching, everybody on this planet has a genius in them. You just have to know what method to use to reach them. Great coaches know this. There are some people will say, well, all you have to do is just discipline them. Just send them into the room and tell them and that works for some. And for some, that's the absolute worst thing that you can do. Some people, you can tell them, look, you got to do 40 push-ups. And if you don't do the 40 push-ups, you're not, and that'll work. And others, that'll just send them away. You've got to know how each person reacts and treat everyone different, including yourself. Including yourself. There's a genius in you. All you have to do is find the method. There was a woman who went to a seminar, and she was looking for, I guess, a way to find more enlightenment in her life. And at the end of the seminar, she was asked to write a story, her autobiography. Only she was given a 5x7 card. Her name is Portia Nelson, so that she didn't get too wordy. And this is what she said, and I think there's great wisdom in this, and it really summarizes this program. She said, chapter 1 of my life. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It still takes forever to find a way out. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. But it isn't my fault. And it still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4 of my life. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down another street. Another street. And another street is a street in which you know that your purpose was put into your heart when you showed up here. There are no accidents. See, every one of us have this choice. We wake up every morning, we open the curtains, we look out, and we can either say, good morning, God, or good God, morning. It's up to you. God bless you, and thank you.